I was born into a deeply loving family. My parents taught me at a young age to appreciate the freedoms of living in this country, to find faith, to love people well, and to value family above all else. I grew up feeling completely supported and loved, but I also grew up in what I later realized was a bubble. As I look back on my upbringing, my intent is to bring to the surface some of the myths I unknowingly subscribed to in order to begin the process of their deconstruction and my own transformation into a culturally responsive teacher. My parents, who both come from hardworking middle-class families, met at the University of Georgia Pharmacy School. My dad's job working for a pharmaceutical company moved our family to towns outside of Indianapolis, Chicago, Zionsville, Memphis, Dallas, and ultimately Denver. My parents would always choose the houses they bought based on the school districts, and we always lived in the suburbs. I grew up in comfortable neighborhoods with nice parks, big houses, and spacious backyards. Throughout my public school education, most of my classmates and teachers were white. All of my close friends and neighbors were white. The only times I came into contact with people of color were when we visited our southern family in Georgia, or when we drove into the cities that seemed to be simultaneously spaces of sophistication and of danger. I remember going to see concerts and plays downtown Memphis at the Orpheum Theater, while simultaneously hearing my parents call Memphis the murder capital of the world. In Chicago, our family would take the train downtown at Christmas time to see Santa, and along the way, my dad would tell us about the Cabrini Green projects, explaining all about the violence of ghettos. Looking back, I can see how convoluted my perception of the urban space actually was. When I was little, my dad had a party trick for me. He'd ask, "Caroline, where are you going to college?" Nicely conditioned, I would respond, "Harvard." College was always an expectation for me. My parents, who wholeheartedly believe in the values of good education and of work ethic, taught me to believe hard work and hard work alone leads to success. This applied to sports, my love for theater, and especially school. Until recently, as I've started to unravel the true inequities of our school system, the myth of meritocracy remained very much intact for me. When my family moved to Colorado, my parents bought their house in an area that would allow me to attend Grandview High School, a Cherry Creek high school known for its performing arts department and German program, a high school that is still more than 80% white. During the summer of my sophomore year, I was given the opportunity to study abroad in Germany. It was the first time I experienced what it was like to be a minority in a foreign country. Through this experience, I realized my love for other cultures and languages. I came back from Germany feeling like a citizen of the world, open-minded and progressive, committed to bridging cultural gaps, and yet still very unaware of how little I understood about inequity. Despite Grandview's lack of diversity, I did have friends of different ethnicities and backgrounds. However, I don't remember ever acknowledging their race or difference. As I look back, I realize how easy it was for me to unknowingly fall into patterns of colorblind racism, mostly by my ignorance that racism was still alive and thriving. Because my family moved around so often, I adopted Griffin, Georgia, my mom's hometown, as my own pseudo-hometown. During my summers there, I caught glimpses of what it looked like to belong to a community centered around Sunday suppers and high school football games. As much as I loved going home to the South every year, it didn't take long for me to realize I was different than the rest of my Southern family. To them, I was a Northerner. My cousins, who were some of my closest friends, would often make fun of my Yankee accent, and I started to realize I didn't quite understand some of Southern culture, the Confederate flags, for example, or the cultural hostility between the white people and the African American people in Griffin. From my relatives, I began to learn about Griffin's transformation from a bustling mill town and farming community to an economically struggling place of white flight and deteriorating public schools, all blamed on African American culture. This was really the first time I ever witnessed firsthand real racial tension. Although I felt I could amply resist the blatant racist sentiments I often witnessed in the South, it did not mean I could resist the aspects of white privilege that seep through my upbringing. Even now, I've become more and more aware of the many ways the color of my skin creates certain advantages and opportunities for me that are unavailable to others. When I first started to understand the depth of this privilege, it was hard for me to reconcile my feelings of guilt and shame with the desire to move past my discomfort in order to reconstruct my own identity as one that rejects the ignorance that surrounds white supremacy and the master narrative of history. After I I graduated high school, I attended the University of Colorado at Boulder, where I majored in English literature and finally had the opportunity to explore minority and female authors and take classes such as African American women writers and literature of the Holocaust. It was during my experience at CU that I finally began to realize the distortion of my concepts of historical and universal knowledge and began relearning truths about marginalized groups and their part in history, literature, and art. During college, I also had the opportunity to go to Belize for a service trip where my team built a playground for a local church. I began to see, however, that this community I thought so desperately needed our help actually had much more to give me and my mindset concerning knowledge. Members of the local church provided us with homes to sleep in and cooked meals for us, and the local kids desperately wanted to know us and play with us. I've never felt such strong community ties. My experience in Belize really changed my individualistic construction of knowledge, and for the first time I was able to see the value of communal care, selflessness, and reciprocity in direct opposition to the American values of independence, self-reliance, and personal success that have become so infused in my identity. After college, I married Joe, the incredible guy I've dated since high school. I identify as heterosexual, and I've recently realized how easy it is for me to unconsciously sync heterosexuality with normality, even though I'm a supporter of the LGBT community. Growing up, sexuality just wasn't something we ever talked about openly in school, even when we read the works of authors like Oscar Wilde and Truman Capote. Now I understand sexual diversity as something we need to talk about and normalize in the classroom, because it so deeply affects how we understand and view the world around us. Much of my perception about what it means to care for others comes from my faith and Christian perspective on loving and serving others. I hope to be a kind, patient teacher who provides my students with hope and the ability to persevere. Until this program, I didn't realize the many different ways teachers can provide care for their students, offering them tools to foster internal resilience, applying womanistic and maternal values in our classrooms, being a community resource, and advocating for both socio-emotional and physical needs. Now that I've started to dismantle many of the myths of my former mindset, my question is, what's left? I feel the tension, paradoxes, and contradictions that coexist in many of the discoveries I've made. For example, the urban space is sophisticated, violent, and neither. I'm Southern, but I'm not Southern. I'm white, but I don't want to subscribe to whiteness. I'm straight and female, but I'm not normal. Schools are constructed institutions upholding discrimination and also opportunities for transformation. Internally, I stand for equity, for culturally responsive teaching, and for critical introspection and conscientization, and yet externally, my skin color remains a symbol of oppression. Right now, I'm trying to live in the afterwash of myth deconstruction and in the contradictions that have surfaced as a result. Right now, I'm learning and growing as a human being, as a teacher, and as an advocate for social change. Right now, I'm thriving and responding to the tension, and I hope for the sake of my students, school, and society that I never stop.